we're drawing today. She's a very, very new character from the newest Pixar film. She makes me a little bit anxious. Anybody know who we're drawing? Anxiety. We're drawing Anxiety from Inside Out 2. Are you guys ready to get started? Alright, let's do it. So, most of our characters start with a pretty basic geometric shape. Anxiety is actually going to start with a squished oval. So you took a circle and you went kind of like swoosh, just a little bit of an oval. It's going to be wider than it is tall. It's going to be pretty small though. And I'm going to start pretty far down on my paper because she's got this big poof of hair that sticks straight up. So I want to make sure that I got plenty of space up top for that. So I'm going to lock my wrist and my elbow and really use my shoulder to give me these nice circular motions to make this kind of swooshed oval. And as you can see, I am making tons of these ovals. I'm going around and around until I have the good shape that I like. I'm not just picking one shape and going with it. That's the wonderful part about rough sketching. If there's anything that you feel like needs some touch-ups, you can just add more light lines until you find that circle or that shape that you are happy with. All right, let's add in some guidelines to help place in her features. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this little oval shape right in half from top to bottom. And I'm actually going to pull that line way up, because that's going to help me keep her hair symmetrical when we draw it in a little bit later. And then I'm going to find the middle of this oval shape the other direction and go just slightly below it. So I want a little bit more space on top than on the bottom. All right, now we've got a potato with Kylo Ren's lightsaber going through it. Nothing like Anxiety, right? So let's start adding some features to her to make her look more like a character and less like a blob. So, let's start out with her eyes. So she's got really big eyes and they're really, really close together, so much so that they overlap. This is usually the case where if a character is kind of silly, a little bit goofy. So I'm going to go ahead and add in these circles. They're going to rest right on this horizontal guideline. And they're going to kind of pop out of that oval. They're pretty big. And usually that left one is overlapping in front of the right. But if you want to switch it up and go the other way, it's totally up to you. It kind of just depends on which direction she's facing. It's kind of the same thing with Pluto. Pluto also has those overlapping eyes. She's got these big old eyes, and I'm going to go ahead and actually lock these in. If you've never heard that term before, if you've never been here, if you've never heard locking in, basically what that means is I'm just pushing a little bit harder on my pencil and darkening up the stuff that I really want to keep, and that's what's going to make those lighter lines fade away. So I'm just locking in those eye shapes. That's the only thing I'm going to lock in for right now. I've locked in this left one first because it kind of overlaps in front of that right one. If you haven't seen Inside Out 2, don't worry, I will keep this a spoiler-free class. Of course, we know that Anxiety is a new character from the second movie, so she is very new, but I won't give any spoilers to the plot of the movie. We're just going to talk about kind of how it was made and the choices that they made when they were creating it. For example, so we had how many emotions in the first Inside Out? It was 5, right? So originally for the second one, they wanted to add 9 more. And that was going to be kind of crazy. This was going to be a lot. So they decided to narrow it down to 4. Anybody remember the names of the other 3? We have Anxiety, Envy, Embarrassment, and Ennui. Yes, so those are our 4 new emotions. Ennui means boredom. So yeah, those are our 4 new emotions for teenage Riley. Those are the 4 that kind of come out when she hits puberty.
And nostalgia.
Nostalgia is there too. She comes in for a small second. She's a very a slight featured character. They were gonna have her be more of a character actually in that second movie, but they decided to have her kind of be like a one-off joke instead. She has this part where she comes up and she's like, "Remember when we all came to headquarters?" And they're like, "That's 2 seconds ago." She's like, "Those were the days." She's great. She's wonderful. If they make it Inside Out 3, I really hope she comes back because I thought she was so funny. All right. Let's continue sculpting out our facial structure for Anxiety. I'm going to add one more guideline that cuts right through the middle of those eyeballs that I just drew. Keeping that super, super light though. That's just going to help us kind of sculpt out our face for Anxiety. So Anxiety's face is really long. Her mouth almost looks kind of like a hot dog bun is what I would describe it as. So to start to sculpt this out, I'm going to start over here right next to this eyeball on the left. And I'm going to bring up this diagonal line that pops up to that guideline that I just drew. And I'm going to do that on the other side as well. And then we're going to turn that line into kind of a hook shape. So it's going to curve out and then down. So like right below the circle. If you'd like, you can go ahead and add just a stretched out U shape right below our little squished oval. That kind of helps me line up those 2 lines. But basically they're going to turn into these hook shapes that kind of come come back and connect down to that bottom line. So we're really extending her jaw out. But this character, Anxiety, is voiced by Maya Hawke. If you recognize that name, you might recognize her from Stranger Things. She was in this movie. She does a fantastic job with this character. I thought that this character was very, very, very funny. I thought it was a very good representation of what it feels like to be anxious. But again, I will not give too many spoilers about this movie. But we did have quite a few emotions that were going to kind of come in and join the team in the second film. Originally, for the first film, they were actually considering having 27 emotions in that first film. And I'm kind of glad they didn't decide to do that. I'm glad they narrowed it down, because that would have been a little bit confusing trying to figure out who's in charge of which moment. But they decided to narrow it down because they actually talked to a psychologist who actually works with teenagers. And they asked basically, what are the most common emotions that teenagers feel? And they kind of narrowed it down to those 5 originally, and then they added those 4 stages. All right, let's add in a little bit of detail on those eyes. So she is, of course, very anxious all the time. So her eyelids are actually going to come up from the bottom with these stretched out rainbow shapes. They kind of go up to that guideline that I drew. And this is just going to make her look a little bit nervous. And then I'm going to add in her pupils to make it look like she's looking straight out at all of you. But if you want to make her looking in a different direction, totally go for it. Maybe you want your Anxiety to look like Hey from Moana. That is totally up to you, your artistic choice. I'm going to draw in these 2 pupils in the center. I made them pretty small because she is very excitable. And her eyes are always like darting around because she's very anxious. But no matter what shape or size you want for those pupils, you want to make sure that they are the darkest part on your page, because eyes are really where we draw connections with our characters. So it's really, really important that those are nice and dark. I'm going to add a little bit of detail underneath those eyes. I'm going to add a couple of these little wrinkles, like she's got little stress lines. They're just these little stretched out C shapes or these little U shapes right underneath those eyes. And that's just to show that she's super duper stressed. All right, for her mouth shape, she's got kind of this like weird expression going on. She looks like she's almost biting her lip. So to make that expression for her, I'm going to start in the center here with a stretched out rainbow. So it's going to look like she's kind of got a little frown. And then from that frown on either side, I'm going to pull that up into like kind of a smile on either side. So I've got kind of this squiggly line in the center of my page. And then I'm basically going to mirror this line that I drew for the outside of the face and bring it up and down with that same kind of hook shape. I'm going to leave it about here, so I'm not going to connect it to anything just yet. But I've got this kind of hook shape that follows the same angle of the face. So whatever you've got going on for the outside of that face, you want to follow that same line and curve it up and around. And then Anxiety's got some pretty big teeth on her. She's got these very big teeth, and they're kind of all spaced out. So the first one that we're going to draw, she doesn't really have buck teeth, but she has one little tooth that hangs out right in the front here. So I'm going to add a couple of these U shapes. I'm going to start out with the first one right in the front. And then I'm going to add one more on each side of that. I'm leaving a little bit of a gap in between them. They are kind of spaced out a little bit. That's kind of what makes her look a little bit more goofy. And then I'm going to add 2 more on either side of that with 2 more of these stretched out U shapes. And then to make her look like she's kind of biting her lip, I'm going to go back to that little mouth shape that I started to draw and bring it back and connect it to those teeth. That's what's going to make her look like she's really biting down on her lip, because we're only going to see the sides of her mouth. And then I like to go in and shade in the area where her mouth is supposed to be open, just to make it super obvious that we are seeing the inside of her mouth. That just kind of helps to give a little bit of contrast and show that her mouth is a little bit open. But this film, or I guess the first film really, was inspired by Pete Docter's daughter. He wanted to kind of deal with the emotions of watching his daughter grow up and go from being a very outspoken kid to kind of being a more shy teenager. That's why we watch Riley go from this kind of outspoken kid to a more like shy girl when she moves to San Francisco. So he was kind of doing this to kind of express how he felt about watching his own daughter grow up and the change in those emotions. I am going to add a little bit of a neck to Anxiety. I'm just going to add these 2 stretched out C shapes that are going in on either side. She's got a very, very tiny neck. And then I'm going to add some stripes on that little shirt. She does have a little like turtleneck. And now that we've got her whole face in place, we got to go ahead and add in that hair for her. So her hair is very, very tall and very poofy. So to start out for that hair, on either one of these eyes, on either side of this vertical guideline, I'm going to pull up these two diagonal lines on either side. They kind of angle out a little bit. And then from each of those diagonal lines, I'm going to turn them into these big hook shapes, or these like upside down J's almost. Big hook shapes. Once I've got those hook shapes, I'm going to jump up above, and I'm actually going to turn them into these like big shark fin shapes almost by adding another curve on top to make these big, or it looks almost like a fountain kind of exploding out of the top of her head. And I'm keeping this super light because I'm going to go back and I'm going to add in some hair texture. So her hair is very messy, it's very frizzy. So you can add a bunch of these little blade of grass shapes in any way you would like. You can follow me, or you can give her a totally different hairstyle if you want hers to kind of look more spiky. But I'm just going to go around and add a couple of these shark fin shapes just to show that her hair has a little bit more texture. So I'm going around as I'm locking in and just adding a bit more of these little blade of grass shapes as I go. Yeah, there were originally going to be a couple other of these emotions in Inside Out 2. They were going to add shame, guilt, and nostalgia. Shame, of course, kind of ended up turning into anxiety. They kind of combined the two a little bit. They realized that kind of one and the other were a little bit too similar, so they decided to cut shame and keep anxiety instead. And of course, they were going to add nostalgia as a more occurring emotion, but they decided to just keep her as a little bit of a one-off bit, which I'm very glad they did. I think she's very funny. We've got many talented voice actors on this film, as well as Maya Hawke. We've got Amy Poehler as Joy, Phyllis Smith as Sadness. We did have Bill Hader as Fear. He did not return for the second movie. Instead, it was Tony Hale who voices Forky. He did a fantastic job with the Fear role, in my opinion. We've got Louis Black as Anger. And then we've got Mindy Kaling as Disgust in the first movie. I unfortunately don't know who came back to reprise the role in the second film, but I know it wasn't her. But they also did a fantastic job with Disgust as a character. Alright, to give this hair a little bit more texture, I'm going to add a couple of these lines kind of shooting up from the base of her hair, curving out on either side. And then her hair gets more dense towards the bottom, so I like to add a little bit of shading towards the bottom of her hair. That gets a little bit lighter as we go up the little stalk, I guess you would say, for her hair, because her hair kind of looks like a little tree. And then the last thing that we need for our drawings of anxiety is going to be some little eyebrows for her to really show her emotion. And her eyebrows aren't really like other eyebrows. They kind of float in the nothingness. They float right above her eyes, and they kind of intersect with that little hair stalk. So I'm going to start with these stretched out U shapes, curving inwards to make her look kind of nervous. But she didn't stop with the Y2K pencil thin brows. So we're going to thicken those up a little bit, just to make sure so she missed that trend. And I'm going to thicken these up and make them look more like crescent moon shapes, and I'm going to go ahead and shade them in nice and dark. And once you have those eyebrows, that's pretty much it for our drawings of anxiety. Anything else you want to add is totally up to you and considered extra credit. Maybe you want to draw like Joy or someone in the background, trying to keep her off the console. Maybe you want to draw some little bubbles to make like core memories around. But the final mark that any artist needs on their page is going to be their signature. So go ahead and find a spot next to your drawing to sign your name. Be nice and proud.